Hello and welcome to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen Haupt, and I'm joined today in a remote episode with Father Boquet. Hi, Father.
Great, Colleen, to be with you today, and we're both home visiting our families in anticipation of Christmas. So, what a wonderful blessing! So, thank goodness for technology. We're able to get together despite the distance.
Yes, so let's just start today. We're talking about a recent Spirit and Life of yours, Father, and so it was talking a little bit about how school children are being indoctrinated with the LGBTQ agenda. So, can you just talk a little bit about what is actually happening in schools that are indoctrinating children with this agenda?
Sure. Well, Colleen, I mean, we've talked about this before in a number of our podcasts, and I've written numerously on this subject. So I know to our listeners and that are familiar with our work will not be unfamiliar with the subject matter. But to those that may be fresh to our podcast, the main issue here is how our young people, our youth, especially our young children, from the age of kindergarten through grade school into middle schools, and especially in high school levels, are being, indoctrinated into a very radical agenda, that people, label as the LGBTQ, but it's a little deeper in the sense that it's the sexual revolution. It's the continuation of a mindset that treats the human person purely as a body that can experience and enjoy, things purely from a physical point of view, and a disregard for the fact that we are made in the image and likeness of God, and that we are our bodies are part of who we are, and it's not separate entities that are to be ruptured. And I think that our parents, who are bombarded from every direction, Colleen, in the social media, in the movie industry, in the school systems, a lot of times it's a difficulty in how to respond to it. It's overwhelming, and when we don't have the connection, and we tend to find the narrative being so overwhelming and powerful, we don't know how to respond. So that's why I wanted to phrase it in such a way that really this has been an ongoing battle, for decades. So it's not something directly new. The whole gender dysphoria conversation is something new in our conversation, and the movement that we see around it. But this issue really revolves around, exploiting our children, exploiting, their innocence and their understanding of what it means to be a boy or a girl, male, female, which I know we'll talk about in a little while, that some of the bishops have responded to. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we're dealing with. So what we're dealing with again is just the schools, taking advantage of their time with our young children in the system to introduce them to sexual explicit conversation materials, not only in the library books that they're finding now, but also in the classroom itself. And in the article, I make note of a situation that occurred in Chicago, where this person just kind of celebrates the fact what they brought into the school. And what was disappointing to me, and this is what made me, Colleen, write the article really, was the lack of the response from parents and those in leadership. So that's what really got my attention.
Yeah, and that's what made it different than other ones that you'd read, basically. Or, like, had you heard other stories where parents had responded and then this was a unique one because parents didn't? Is that why it jumped out to you? Or,
It did. I mean, as you know, being HLI being in Virginia, and I mentioned this recently that people in the national news would be familiar with Loudoun County, and so in the school board there, and this contested issue between the school board and parents. So are tremendous, in the sense of an outrage from parents, and I'm very grateful for. But at the same time, what caught my attention in this article was the comment, and I'm going to use my paper so I can go back to it, so I apologize for that, but I think it's just good, and so that I get the right name. So this happened in Chicago, and this is called Project Veritas, and his name is Joseph Bruno, I make note of. And so he's the dean of this private school in Chicago, and this is what caught my attention. He says, he gleefully recounts how the presenter passed out various toys and, and I'm not going to get too explicit here in the podcast, but very explicit, issues. But then he says, when someone says, weren't you concerned that the parents were going to say something or those in leadership? He says, no. He says, he also noted that he had brought in a drag queen and that it doesn't ask permission from the school's trustees or for the activities because he knows that their response will be, that's wonderful. This is what caught my attention in the headline, was the very fact that the people who are entrusted, Colleen, with the protection of our young people, to protect them from such vile and such obtrusive content, are not doing their job. And the other thing is that the impression was that even parents, and I would say this, don't know how to respond because what they'll see is in Loudoun County, an example where police are brought in and parents are brought out of meetings and they're threatened by the government. This is wrong, and this is what I think oftentimes gets parents, to not know what to do. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's also the case in Texas right now where the superintendent is being investigated by the federal government for removing books in schools. I read about that one recently.
Correct.
He removed a whole bunch of these type of books, and now the federal government is saying that he's making like the school an unsafe place for children who are identify as different genders. So you also have that intimidation aspect of the federal government getting involved on
Exactly.
what was originally a school level.
Exactly. And I think the real challenge for parents, Colleen, is in for all of us, not just parents, but all of us, is children are welcomed into this world by their mother and their father, and they are the primary educators of their children, not the state. A child does not belong to the state; it's not a product of the state, and so can the state, promote policies and procedures that they want in their systems? Yet we know they can. At the same time, but parents have rights, and they have very specific duties and obligations toward their children that the state is not to usurp. The state is not to overstep their boundaries. And here we have a completely, a battle in front of us where the state is overstepping its responsibility, and it's telling parents that your children, you don't know what's best for them. I'm sorry, that's wrong. In some cases, we know that the state has to intervene in very unique situations where parents are not doing their responsibility. But that's not the same situation here. Because I had an interview recently, and I was asked, well, no, shouldn't the state intervene in certain things? Of course, when we have real abusive situations where parents and adults responsible for children are not truly doing their duty and responsibility. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a true manipulation of the state, intervening where it does not have a right to intervene and imposing values that are contrary, to a majority of parents. And so this is a real issue here that we need to make more visible. We need to discuss. We need to also empower parents in how to address these issues. And we need our brothers and sisters in the legal vocation, who are doing family advocacy, to keep up their good work and to step forward even more so, to do more pro bono work and to really, protect our parents and protect our young people from this very vile agenda.
On that note, what happened recently at the Balenciaga fashion company? I know you wrote a little bit about that. And then how are people reacting to that?
So this was for those of you, you can come to the article. It'll give you the links to the full story. But this is involving a very famous, industry and fashion and high-end materials. But they produced, two, bears, toys, with and again, I don't want to get too graphic on the podcast, but the idea how they dressed them up in very explicit, attire, to the point where even one of the animals had a bruised eye, in a sense of have been beaten up in some kind of sexual encounter, and the backlash, was not as much as I would have wanted it to see. There was backlash, not, but the idea is that people, didn't recognize, how really, what does this say? Where we're encouraging young kids, young children, especially young girls, to think that this is acceptable behavior that would, and think about this, this is adults manipulating children. This is something that should cause all of us to be so angry over. And so the backlash was is that people said they came out and they were very vocal, but not to the degree, again, that you would think. Because I think that the point of it is that people don't know what to do with it. It was removed. I mean, they apologized. Okay, the company apologized, but this apology is not the issue here. I'm grateful for the apology, but the idea is, why don't you admit what you're doing? You are using your industry to promote something that is sexually explicit, aimed directly at children.
And I believe that they had children posing with
They
these
did.
bears was
They did.
also part of it. It was and that was part of the backlash, and they also had an image of a court case that had something to do with child pornography and like the background of one of their images. Like there was a few different things directly related to children and this kind of
Right.
disgusting behavior in their
Right. And it's
materials.
interesting, and I don't compare the in a sense, but I think that, the idea of here, when you think about commercials, now I don't watch very much TV, all right? But at one time as a younger boy, seeing commercials, for smoking, for example. And this was, people got very upset when you would see things being aimed at children. And you remember, now maybe Colleen, you're too young to remember this, but I know they're still around. But the little candy cigarettes that were, so this was aimed obviously at children, and so people got very upset with this, especially as science and medicine began to show the correlations between many things, and so there was a needed response that children should not be manipulated in such a way and this painted in such a way. So why are we not doing this with regard to this issue that we're talking about? Where is the outrage that this is being aimed at children that, first of all, are children? Their psychological development is still in development. Their understanding of sexuality is very limited, to the age that they are in. And so, and plus, this is a time of innocence. It's a time, of curiosity to ask questions, and but for parents to be the ones, to help guide them. So this is why it got me so upset, and it probably is coming across in the video that we're recording. It upsets me because this is the role of parents, and don't let me pause there for a second. Sadly, some parents are allowing this to happen and actually encouraging this behavior. This is also concerning, but we'll save that for another day, for another conversation. But it is concerning to me that people are trying to think that this is normal behavior, that this is just normative life. And we should say not only no, but we should fight back against this kind of ideology.
Well, and then along those lines, how can our listeners help protect children from this type of agenda going forward?
So, as I often say, especially parents, but any of us adults. This is not just for parents, but for all adults who have the responsibility of caring for our young people. An example of this, as a priest, in my own diocese, I have to go through, safe training, and anytime I travel, and especially if I'm going to have any connection with the people of God, especially young people, I have to go with a letter of suitability. I have to have, a proper certifications. And why? Because of the need for adults to be responsible for other people. And so I think here we need to be aware. So first of all, we need to read. We need to hear what is being said. We need to be aware of what is happening in our school districts, attending our school boards. We need to ask our young children, especially those with younger children especially, what is being taught in your school? What did you learn today? What books are you reading? Keep them innocent, in the sense of we don't need to lead, them into something that is not necessarily happening, but at least to be aware, can, look at their books, look at what they're bringing home. Now, a lot of times, Colleen, the teachers and the leadership in some of these school districts are not actually doing their job. in the sense of they're not sending materials home, and they're not giving people the information they need. So parents need to be aware that a lot of times kids are told, don't tell your parents, don't say anything. So we need to be aware. We need to be conscious of what's happening, and keep that aware, by being alert, be vigilant.
Well, I know that when I was growing up, the libraries in my area they were trying to pass a bill in our state that meant that once you were, I think, 13, parents couldn't be told what books you were getting out from the library. So if you had books that were overdue and your parents called the library, the librarian would say that they didn't have permission to tell you. And it ended up being fought, and they pushed it up to 16, I think. We were trying to get it to 18, but that was just something that happened when I was still, I think I was 11 when around the time that happened. But even back then, there was still this push to protect children's privacy, but in a way that they could be exposed to things in the libraries that parents didn't want them to be, and the parents wouldn't know.
Exactly. And I think too is that, it's also, again, back to the younger grade levels, kindergarten, elementary school, middle school especially. You have, sadly, and there's many stories of story time, story hour, where they're bringing in, people, drag queens, and they're reading them books. And, so they're introducing this, and really manipulating children, exploiting children who have no power. This is the real issue here. This is an exploitation. That's why they're victims. They're being used, by adults. And this is something that and to see the government so intrusive in this and so participatory in this is really concerning. And it's good to see where many people are raising their voices. We are seeing people in circles around our country speaking out against this and fighting the good fight. But my goodness gracious, Colleen, we need many more people in this. I mean, these are children that we're talking about, and even in the high school level, these are still children. They're adolescents, but they're still children, and they still need to be protected. And so it's we need to really turn up the heat and push back against this. So awareness is important. Seeing what's happening, asking questions of your children, and discussing things. I think the other thing, Colleen, that's very frightening to me is parents don't discuss the beautiful gift of human sexuality. That's the other thing too, is that we're not talking about the beauty of what it means to be male and what it means to be female, and we're not discussing, the false ideology that's out there, which has got some of the bishops, involved, that I talk about it in my article, that are really responding back and writing beautiful pastoral letters. But letters they're letters unless they're going to be exposed to the general public, and they need to become part of our catechesis and part of our outreach.
And along that note, what documents did the bishops recently release, and how can the guides help Catholics in navigating this?
Yeah, Colleen, what I make note in the column, that I know that you'll help our audience to find the links and be able to get the information. So, but I was talking about Bishop Burbidge from the Arlington Diocese and Archbishop Listecki from the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. Both wrote pastoral letters on the issue. So I'll give both names, and then with time permits, I'd like to just give a quick quote from each one. So Bishop Burbidge said his document is called A Catechesis on the Human Person and Gender Ideology. And then Archbishop Listecki, Catechesis and Policy on Questions Concerning Gender Theory. So let me give a quick quote from Bishop Burbidge. He says, the acceptance and/or approval of a person's claimed transgender identity is particularly dangerous in the case of children, whose psychological development is both delicate and incomplete, noting that in such a time of confusion, what children need is clarity and affirmation of their God-given identity and dignity. So that wonderful little sentence there is packed. And so as a parent, responsible as the primary educator of their child and children is to help them to accept the identity, the God-given identity they have, and to be sensitive to their questions and awareness of what they're going through and what's affecting them in the culture around them, in their school systems and so forth, and be able to keep focusing them and directing them and helping them. It's so important. It's a great pastoral letter by Bishop Burbidge. The second is a quote from Archbishop Listecki. Now, he made the headlines, by the way, of national news because he refused in the diocese to accept the narrative of all these gender-appropriate pronouns, all right? And so he made the national news, and he says, quote, permitting the designation of a preferred pronoun, while often intended as an act of charity, instead promotes an acceptance of separability of the biological sex and gender, and thus opposes the truth of our sexual identity. So these are very powerful statements in the midst of documents that are really there, Colleen, to educate, those, all of us, myself. I mean, this is so important for me as a pro-life leader to be familiar with what our bishops are writing. Two is it helps me also to find new ways of articulating, these truths and being able to help people to understand them. So I truly appreciate when our bishops write these pastorals and give these guidances. And I know the people of God don't always have an opportunity to be introduced to them, though they should. And so I'm hoping that priests will pick these up in their parishes, no matter how hostile it might get, and it will. We know that there's going to be backlash, but this is the obligation of both Bishop Burbidge, Archbishop Listecki, and I also quote a recent statement from Bishop Daly of Thomas Daly, that is speaking on behalf of the Conference of Catholic Bishops. And what I'll do is, with your permission, Colleen, I'll kind of pull back to this. So he is the chair of the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops Education Committee. And he picks this up very strongly. And I like to read just one of the things that Bishop Daly speaks about. He says, I pull here, I say he pulls no punches. So he doesn't. He's very clear in affirming that children in their, arguing that affirming children in their gender confusion leads children to become the modern orphans of our society, end quote, who are being, quote, experimented upon by adults who really do not have the best interests of children at heart. This is, talking about holding no punches. And it is, it's, like I said in the beginning, it's exploitation. It's treating children as things, as commodities. It's an indoctrination of a radical ideology that falsifies the human person. Thus, you hear the titles of both bishops, Listecki and Burbidge, about the human person. All right, it falsifies human sexuality. It ruptures the understanding of what it means to be male and female as sexual persons, and how do we respond as sexual beings, in an appropriate way that respects our very identity as being male and female. There's so much to this, Colleen, and it's so great, to have our bishops standing and speaking to this, and not just our bishops. There are great political personalities in our country on the federal level fighting the good fight. We have people in the social media who are fighting the good fight. But we can't do it alone. And so if we were the only podcast speaking about it, what traction? We're going to get very limited. We need more people talking about this, and our parents, Colleen, need our help. They feel alone. I hear it all the time. I get the comments. I get letters. Father, what do? I go to these meetings and I get ridiculed. I get escorted out of a meeting. Other parents say, "Oh, you got to catch up with the times. What can we do? It's just the way it is." This is wrong. This is false. And so our parents need us. They need help. They need support. They need encouragement. And they also need catechesis, because we know that the government wrongly threatens them. All right? We hear the hate speech. This podcast, Colleen, probably, we'll see if it gets, what traction it gets. It might even get pulled off of some of the social platforms. This is how the other side works. They don't want this talked about. And I did 2 radio interviews recently, live programs on this. And the last one said, well, Father, we might see you in jail together because this is going to cause some upheaval. But it should cause upheaval, because we're talking about young people here. We're talking about what Bishop Daly speaks about. We're making these children orphans of our society. We're using them, and so we should be up in arms. And I guess that's why I'm so passionate about it and so upset about it. But at the same time, Colleen, I'm also grateful to the many people who are doing the yeoman's work in this, who are out there speaking about this, and who are addressing it, and who are willing to take the heat, to address the in a sense, the elephant in the room.
Well, thank you so much, Father. And yeah, to all of our listeners, just good encouragement to everyone just to be motivated to try to stand up against this.
Our children need us. So yeah, they need us. Yeah, so this we must do this. It's not a we ought to not ought we have to do this. We got to get this. We got to be involved.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Father. And yeah, to all of our listeners, please like, follow, and or like, subscribe, and turn on notifications if you're listening on YouTube or Rumble, and if you're listening on our audio platforms, please follow, share with your friends, and keep on living the culture of life. God bless.